Tom, I'll just share a story. I used to work with a guy who had a poster on his wall that said, "There's no such thing as a stupid question, but there are a lot of inquisitive idiots." So I do try to keep that in mind.
Okay, you're all set.
Thank you. All right. Good morning, everybody. I'm just going to wait for the list to fill up and give everyone a chance to get connected to audio. Good morning, Consumer Counsel Coleman.
Good morning. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to everyone.
I think it looks like I'm just going to start. Looks like people are still coming in, but I'll start. It's 10:02. So good morning. Happy New Year to everyone. Welcome to docket numbers 260103 and 260104, which are the annual rate adjustment mechanism proceedings for Eversource and UI. My name is Tom Wheel. I'm the interim chairman of the Public Utilities Regulatory Authority. I'm joined today virtually by my colleagues, Vice Chairman David Arconti, and interim commissioners Jan Beecher, Holly Cheeseman, and Everett Smith for his first ever technical meeting at Pura. We have an agenda in front of us today. I'll start with a general overview, which I will try to keep brief. I'll try, of the intended purpose of this meeting. As most folks on this call are probably aware, Pura established a new procedural framework for the RAM dockets in the final decision in docket 200101 that was issued on December 2nd, 2020. That decision established a two-phase approach to the annual RAM dockets, with the first phase centered around a known and measurable filing that's due in January of every year, and the second phase around what that decision called a complete filing in March of every year. It also established kind of a standard procedural schedule for RAM dockets, and that, for those following along at home with our easy to decipher docket numbering system, that's on page 16 of the final decision in docket 200101 for reference, that general kind of schedule. So here we are in January of 2026. It's been over 5 years since that structure was established. We have an entirely new commission, none of whom were here for that decision in 200101. So we thought it might be useful to kind of check in with the stakeholders who engage in these proceedings every year to hear feedback and potential recommendations for changes, improvements to the structure of these dockets. So that's why we're here today. This is intended to be an informal, conversational, roundtable discussion for the purpose of just raising ideas for everyone's consideration. I encourage everyone to feel free to brainstorm, jump in and say something, even if you aren't sure if it makes sense. And I'll add, if this meeting doesn't feel productive or helpful, I would also like to hear that. And I would also get the blame for that. Just putting it out there, this was my idea. So if this seems silly, it's my fault. I do want to make two things clear at the outset. First, staff wanted me to be very clear that we do not expect to be able to implement any substantive changes to the overall procedural framework of this year's dockets. We're already going, we're already set up. We're just not going to be able to kind of move a mountain this year, but this is kind of a place to kind of start. So we'll be evaluating like the feedback and ideas that we get from this docket for consideration of maybe implementing changes for next year's dockets. And I know that's not as exciting as it could be, but we need to be kind of thoughtful and deliberative about this. And second, I just want to be clear that the idea is to kind of stick, in terms of scope for today's discussion, to the procedural issues in these dockets specifically, rather than kind of substantive discussions. Most parties on this call probably, I think, did participate in docket 241205, which that was the recent final decision that considered use of like forecasted LMP, locational marginal prices, cost allocation, stuff like that. I think, as noted in that decision. Some of those discussions and maybe other substantive issues are going to be are expected to be addressed in the future after they're considered in this year's dockets. So this discussion isn't supposed to be about that stuff. It's more intended to focus strictly on procedural questions like the dual phase framework, the optimal content of filings, the structure of hearings, briefing, stuff like that. So with that very long-winded introduction out of the way, I think we can actually start the discussion. So according to the agenda, we should start with introductions. So do people want to maybe introduce themselves in order of the agenda, which would put, got to open the agenda. I'm sure everybody else already has it open. Eversource first.
Good morning. Good morning, Chairman Wheel and Vice Chair Conti and fellow commissioners. My name is Marissa Peruta. And do you guys have an echo in the background? I apologize.
Okay. Yeah, you sound like you're in a ghost house.
Sorry, there's a couple of us in the same room. My name is Marissa Peruta, and I'm the Director of Revenue Requirements for Eversource in the state of Connecticut.
Yes, sir. I'm Michael Schelnitz. I am a Manager of Revenue Requirements for Eversource.
And good morning. My name is Doug Horton. I'm the Senior Vice President of Regulatory and Strategic Financial Planning for Eversource. And Chairman, I would just say at the outset, on behalf of Eversource, we really appreciate this opportunity, and I know that it will not be time wasted. I think really appreciate the opportunity to come together and brainstorm and share ideas. I'm looking forward to hear from everybody who's willing to speak. This is going to be great. Thank you.
Thanks. And UI is next, and people can just kind of go. It's UI and then Deep and then OCC on the order, so people can just kind of go in order.
I'll jump ahead of Mr. Hurwitz, Alex Soder, UIL, Counsel for UI. I'm joined by my colleague, Senior Counsel Carrie Gowaski. So I guess the attorneys will jump the line. And then Carrie, you can yield over to Jacob.
Yeah, good morning. I am a new Senior Counsel with UIL. Nice to meet everyone. I will be helping with this technical session today. So it's great to be on. Thank you.
Hey y'all, Jacob Hurwitz. Like everyone else, I'm excited to be here and thank you for the idea, Tom. I'm excited for today's discussion. I'm the Senior Director of Revenue Requirements here on behalf of UI. Hand it to Heather.
Good morning, Heather Tabbitt with UI. I'm the Director of Regulatory, and I also want to thank everybody for this opportunity for us to have a really good discussion on process within this docket. Thank you.
Deep.
Good morning. I'm Susanna Nigro. I'm a staff attorney with Deep.
So the next, good morning, Eric Ennis with Deep. Also looking forward to the conversation. So, and welcome, Commissioner Smith. Good to see you. We have the full panel, and I look forward to working with you going forward.
Thanks, and OCC.
Sure. Good morning to everyone. And yeah, special welcome to Commissioner Smith. Very excited to see you on the panel of faces here and look forward to meeting you in person. I too am very excited about the prospects of this discussion today and appreciate the authority pulling everyone together at the start of the new year to consider some process and framework reforms for the RAM process. So look forward to the discussion. And with that, I will hand it over to Andrew Minikowski, who is OCC's new legal director.
Good morning, everyone. Andrew Minikowski, Legal Director for the OCC. Looking forward to a robust conversation.
And we also have Albert. Albert, you want to jump in? We can't hear you.
At all? Wow.
You sound like you're inside a shoe.
Great. It might be just my voice. I've been sick.
We can hear you better now.
Okay, thank you. I'll just get my phone face really close to the computer. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. So next on the, and welcome to everybody. Next on the agenda We have a presentation from UI. Mr. Hurwitz, are you ready to go with that?
I think we are, but Ms. Tebbets is going to do the
Okay.
lion's share of the talking on this one, so I'll defer to her and do my best backup dancer impression.
Great,
All right.
thank you. All right, so up front, I'm having technical difficulties with my camera. So I have like my cell phone camera on. So if for some reason something goes out with my camera, I apologize. But just wanted to let you know. So thank you. Yeah, and thank you very much for this opportunity. We really appreciate it. We put this together really to just have a high level conversation about a couple of things that we think can streamline the RAM process. So if you want to go to the next slide. Thank you. So this really just kind of gives you an overview of the 4 filings that we put together. And you can see the 4 dates with regards to, how the process unfolds. So you can see here January 15th, which is coming up next week. We have our known and measurable filing. That really just provides folks with information about differences from the prior year that we anticipate incurring for costs or for costs really for this upcoming year. And it, again, is a snapshot of what do we think is going to have changes. It could be power supply contracts. It could be, we have the bonds, right? So that's an example of known and measurables that we would want to include in there. Our next filing is our proposed rates filing. So really this is taking all of the information that we have to calculate rates for the upcoming period. And it doesn't include testimony. And so, I'll back up 1 second, but this is kind of the reason why we're happy to have this discussion, because we have these 4 filings and they're all kind of piecemeal. So I would say, the proposed rates filing is just rates. It's all you're going to get for information. Not a lot of backup information about that, how we calculate the rates. Then you're going to get the March 1st full application. That includes testimony. That also includes all of the backup for the rate calculations, all of the exhibits. And so again, you've had the January 15th with 1 piece, you have February 15th with another piece, and then that full filing for March 1st. And then we have our standard interrogatories filing on March 15th, which more information about that is provided in the appendix here. I won't go through it, but we figured we'd just add a little bit of information for that. Next slide, please. Thank you. So this is also just kind of a snapshot of what you're receiving for information. So you can see in January 15th, we don't provide any RDM data. February 15th, the GSC is actually just a reconciliation. So you're not going to see any of that. For March 1st, you're going to see all of the data that you're looking at. And then March 15th, again, you're not going to receive any of components for the RDM. And then you see we have a May 1 rates effective. Next slide, please. Thank you. This slide's a little messy, but it we wanted to provide a visual of all of the things that you're seeing, that you're receiving, and when you're seeing it in that timeline. So again, you have your known and measurables the 15th. We have a proposed rate filing on the February 15th. Then the 1st is the filing, the 15th is the filing. We then have an initial hearing, usually at the end of March, and that is to discuss the rates that we've proposed for May 1st. Then we will get that interim decision, and it kind of goes through all of this here. We also end up having another full RAM hearing at the end of May. And with the 24/12/05 docket, now we're also going to have an MBFMCC filing at the end of July, most likely, if the 2-tier comes to fruition. And then we'll have the proposed final decision mid-July. Then we're going to have another decision mid-August, and the rates effective September. So there's a lot of things that are going on here administratively. And we think that there are some potential process improvements to allow for more, I would say, we're not looking at it being an administrative burden, but more organized opportunity for all of the information to come in one filing. So if you could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So our proposed process changes really looks at the multiple filings and the multiple hearings. So what we would propose is to eliminate the known and measurable filing and the February rates filing. We would actually look to have one March 1st filing. So all of the known and measurables, rates, and variances would be included in that March 1 filing. And again, we're trying to provide you with all of the information at once. And I know it could also be overwhelming, but I also think that you're getting only pieces. And so when you're only getting pieces, you're not able, parties aren't able to say, well, what is the big picture here? What are they really asking for? And going through all of it. Right now, you're getting pieces at a time. We also looked to eliminate multiple hearings in the spring. We think one single hearing in May was really beneficial. Again, it combines all of the comments and questions and issues into one single hearing, and obviously maybe multiple days, but it's a single hearing period. And it also, I think, allows the parties to kind of look at all the pieces they want to address and not have to wonder, hey, what do I have to go back in the transcript in March and see what we said there? It's an opportunity to just kind of put everything together in one hearing. We'd also look to have an interim decision by April 22nd so that we can have rates effective May 1st. And then when we look at that other NBFMCC here filing that we're going to be probably doing in the summertime, based on what just came out of the other docket, we'd like to get rates effective August 22nd. I'm sorry, final decision by August 22nd, but rates September 1st. Next slide, please. So now you can kind of see all the information you're seeing here. You're getting one filing. We're going to have one rates effective date. And we think that this is just much more streamlined. Next slide. All right, so we come back to this screen, and I think this is a little cleaner. It's certainly not as busy. And we also think that it really gives the January, February, March opportunity to get all of the pieces put together. We have our full filing. We end up with our interim decision in April, make rates effective, full hearing in May. And then, of course, the proposed final decision, the final decision, and the other two pieces would stay the same. But we think that the January, February, March, and April periods really become more cleaned up and administratively more efficient. Next slide. Okay. So we added a little bit of information here as well, and it's really just to show some duplication of efforts that we have seen over the few years. And what we're just putting here is just information, as I said, to say there are some duplications. We do think there could be some administrative efficiencies here, and here are a few examples of what we think could help this process. Next slide. And then again, this is just filing requirement dates, so that just a visual to give you guys an idea of what we are looking at with regards to the different kinds of filings and the different dockets that it's associated with. Next slide. Okay. So this is just an appendix, and we don't really need to go through it, but I wanted to at least provide some background to the known or measurable filings. And then you can kind of just go through these slides. We don't need to go over them, but you can go to the next slide, please. Yeah, so February 15th, how do we come about that? Here is that information. Next slide. The full RAM filing, and next slide. The March 15th, next slide. That's it. So that's it. So happy to discuss, take questions. If Jacob, you would like to add anything to this, please do. But really, we wanted to just give you guys a little bit of information about, what we were thinking about for process improvement. So thank you for allowing us that opportunity.
Yeah, nothing to add from me. Thank you, Heather, and yeah, happy to hear what questions, reactions anyone else has. I know Commissioner Wheel, at the outset, you said this was, that to paraphrase, sort of a brainstorming exploratory session. So for the new commissioners, we wanted to lay out how things have worked in the past and, just put something on the table to get the discussion started. But we're happy to take questions or wherever the group would like to go next.
Thank you. And yeah, we next on the agenda would be questions or comments about UI's presentations. We're happy to. I actually have two, so maybe I'll start. The I guess the question is like so it sounds like the proposal, I don't want to call it a proposal because I get that it's just a brainstorming idea. The idea would be to kind of evaluate the March 1st filing kind of on the papers only, because there wouldn't be a hearing prior to the May 1st adjustment if there's a single hearing and that happens in May.
Yeah, I think that's the idea. For what we're requesting for May 1st is a rate change. And then we end up with so we have that first hearing, it really kind of consumes that rate change. And then we end up with that second hearing in May, which really consumes all of the other pieces. And so while the rates are very important to have a discussion on, certainly the rest of what we are filing really consumes the background onto why we're asking for those rates. And I think, at least we think that that's really the company's opportunity and also the other party's opportunity to dig into all the background of how we came up with those rates.
Okay. So is the idea sort of like there'd be the May 1st adjustment that primarily, I mean, I assume the idea would be that Pura would make a May 1st adjustment based on like our evaluation of the filing and people, and whatever kind of discovery came in or whatever. But then subsequent to the May hearing would be kind of addressing both, like the entire scope, right? Like, so essentially we'd be interested in knowing, did we get it right for that May 1st adjustment? If not, what do we need to do to adjust to correct that? But then also evaluating sort of like whatever else there is left to consider. Or I guess I'll start with the first question. The first question was just, is that the idea that like there'd be like a preliminary rate adjustment that's sort of mostly on the like taking the application as it is, and then the focus of the hearings would be, at least part of the hearings would be kind of evaluating whether we want to adjust the adjustment we made in March.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's what we're looking at here. And like I said, I think that at least, the March hearing really focuses on the rates themselves and like, okay, why are you asking for these rates? All right, here's the backup. But then the May hearing that we have annually really focuses on everything else. And right, did we get the rates for for May 1st correct? And then, do we need to make any changes? And a lot of times those changes end up on the September 1st rate change. So we wouldn't be changing any of that. We're just looking to, like I said, streamline the number of hearings we have. And maybe that ends up having an extra day of hearings because we have a few things. But again, it all happens at the same time period. So we kind of found that we feel that it really gets all of the issues together at once instead of piecemealing it.
Okay. And my next question, I see there's a bunch of other questions. I don't want to monopolize the questions. My other question was sort of about, it sounds like the kind of second issue in your presentation about kind of duplicative filings or maybe streamlining filings or streamlining compliance. Does UI, this is sort of a statement and a question. I think what would be helpful for Pura would be if we had sort of a proposal, like if there was eventually some sort of motion sort of identifying, hey, we're filing these 2 or 3 different things across different dockets. Could we just consolidate them to this one place? Is that something that UI could work on?
Yeah, I mean, let me take that back and let me see what folks think. I think there's opportunity there. I just would need to talk to the folks who are in charge of all of these, who put together all of the information for these filings and see, can we put something together that allows the process to be looked at and then streamline how many filings we are making into, one filing across multiple dockets, etc. Yeah, I'm happy to do that. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks. And I think I'm not playing favorites here, but the first hand I have on my list is Consumer Counsel Coleman. So I'll call on her
Thank you,
first.
Chair Will. I'll try to remain your favorite. But I did have my hand up first. So thank you to UI for putting this on the table. I recognize it's to start discussions. We at the OCC also share the desire to make this process more efficient, but I have some serious concerns with the proposal laid out as I understand it. So currently we have the phase 1 and the phase 2. The phase 1 is sort of the accounting review and the accounting review hearing, and then phase 2 is supposed to be, according to that 2000 decision, the prudency review. And we have found that it's sort of sometimes feels arbitrary to segregate it in that manner and have looked at this discussion as an opportunity to figure out how to combine those and streamline them. So I think we're on the same page with respect to that. However, getting information later, of course, concerns us, and changing rates without a hearing really concerns us, which is what I think I heard as part of your proposal. So some of the brainstorming our team has done has consisted of still getting information. In fact, some of the information, I understand there's the known and measurable filing and then the complete filing. From our perspective, the more we could get earlier and do that full discovery, the more that would enable us to then just have one set of hearings. Whether that's, right now there's the hearings, I think in May and August. Is that, no, March and May. So maybe having one hearing in the middle of that time period would be a more efficient way for us to review and ask the questions we need to and allow the public to have input. But in order to do that, we'd need to have the information to do both the accounting review and the prudency review in advance of that. So that's where our concern with pushing back the filing to March does not give us enough time to do that. So those are initial thoughts, and this is the first time we're seeing the slides, so we're going to continue to marinate on it. And I think we'll have some other specific suggestions as well, but we'll give all the other people with their hands up a chance to react.
I'll just comment first and then invite my colleague to add as she sees fit. But I think point well taken, Ms. Coleman. I think where we were coming from was just if you study the calendar as it exists today, there's filings all the time. We start January 15th and then February 15th and then March 1st and then March 15th. And then we show up for a hearing and then there's another filing and then there's discovery intermixed all through in there and then there's a hearing. And so as a sort of streamlined proposal, we put forth what was in the presentation. What if we aligned the dates for the January 15th known and measurable, the mid-February race filing, we put it all on March 1st. So we're providing a comprehensive package of information all at the same time, and then not to undercut or deny the authority's ability to review that filing or make changes to that filing in phase 1. We didn't mean to suggest that shouldn't happen, of course, or that any of the things that are currently evaluated in phase 1 would not be evaluated in phase 2. We're not trying to change the basic structure that exists today of having a phase 1 and then a phase 2. We're just be observed, studying the calendar. There's a constant sequence of due dates providing similar information this time than that time, and it's our kind of first pass for how to make things a little smoother, a little more efficient. This is what we came out with, but like I said, we're open to talking about things with the group. We don't want to shortchange your opportunity to review by any stretch. So, point well taken. But I just wanted to sort of reiterate our thought process where we're coming from. And I know we have a lot of folks with their hand up. I'll just check if my colleague has anything to add and then hand it back over to the group.
You eloquently explained really our thought process on here. And we are open to discussions on other ways to make this, but this is our initial thought process. So thank you.
Thanks. Now I am going to play favorites because I see Vice Chair Conti's hand up, so he's going to cut the line. Go ahead, Vice Chair.
Sorry, guys. Maybe I don't know, it's maybe a dumb question, but so if we ultimately change rates in May without a hearing, just based off the filings, and then throughout sort of the following up hearing process, there was, some determination that was made, that some information that came to light through questioning through the hearing, that maybe there's some under collection or over collection issue. Would the authority be able to address that in the September adjustment, or would that be considered retroactive?
Well, I think in the past you guys have done that. We've had things come out in our proposed draft decision in early July, and it's saying, we're anticipating this is going to change for September 1st. And so I think you've done it in the past. I don't see why this would be any different than that. But unless someone else thinks otherwise, I don't see any reason why you couldn't do that.
I was going to answer similarly. I think retroactive rate making, it feels teetering on the edge of a legal question. So I'll just disclaim that I'm not a lawyer, but similar to what Ms. Tebbins just described, that is my understanding as well. If there was just hypothetical $100 that was imprudently incurred, and because of the time and whatnot available in phase one that was not discovered in phase one, but it was discovered in phase two, I would absolutely think that could be addressed in the phase two part of this proceeding, like I think it has occurred in certain years past.
Okay. So maybe just kind of question popped in and hearing you talk, Jacob, maybe this would require a lawyer to pop on. So the way you propose the schedule is, even if the authority did adopt rates in May, based on the filings without hearings, and some type of prudency issue came up in the after May in a hearing, that wouldn't preclude us from addressing the hypothetical prudency issue.
No, because you're doing that now, like I said. And so for the March hearing, it really focuses on the rate change. And then the May hearing really focuses on the prudency of all of the backup information we've provided. And you have in the past made changes to things in your draft decision we received in July. So we could easily implement any kind of changes for a September 1st rate change if necessary, because there was something that was found that was good, bad, and different that had to change.
Okay. That's it for me. Thanks, Chairman.
Thank you. I guess since we're having a discussion, I'll just throw in my take. I wouldn't have a concern. I think the entire RAM is actually purposeful retroactive rate making, right? Like where we are, every time we're reconciling, we're looking back to like sort of what actually happened in the past and adjusting for it. So it does. Conceptually, I personally by myself wouldn't have an issue with like a true up. Anyway, that's just me throwing my thoughts in for conversation. Attorney Goodman, you're next on my list.
Thank you, Chair Wheel. Good morning, everyone. Jay Goodman, appearing for the Connecticut Industrial Energy Consumers. Have a couple comments and then one question for the company. Just some general kind of quick reaction to the proposal. We agree with the general idea of trying to streamline the process. For the reasons laid out by UI, we agree that it is, a fairly involved process now, and if there's a way to get through it more efficiently, we think that would be beneficial. We, share OCC's concern with shortening the time, though, available for discovery. I think under the proposal, there would be 2 months less for regulatory staff and other parties to, really dive into the information, conduct the accounting exercise and discovery, et cetera, and would have a concern with that. So my question to the company would be whether it would be possible to submit the full and complete filing that they're proposing on January 15th instead of March 15th. And then before pausing for an answer to that, the other question slash suggestion would be, we think in terms of streamlining, it also makes sense to have the rate change once per year. I think that's also more predictable for customers. And given that the authority recently approved an opportunity for a reopener to the RAM if certain thresholds are met, if the rate were to be set a single time each year, perhaps in September, instead of on an interim basis earlier in the year, and then a final basis in September, that doing so might address some of the procedural concerns that have been raised here. For example, if we're looking at a rate change in September, then we don't run into the issue of is an interim rate set without a hearing earlier in the year and how to work around that. But, given again, if we were to move to that single annual rate change, there still will be an opportunity to potentially adjust it, based on the new procedure recently adopted by the authority. So thanks for the opportunity to comment, and I'll just pause and listen to a response.
I'll
sure.
start, and then Heather, you want to add as you see fit.
Yeah.
So I think accelerating the March 1st filing to January 15th is not realistic from UI's perspective. At least I can't speak for Eversource, but that's an involved filing that takes time to prepare. It depends as a starting point on our books and records for the previous calendar year. And, we're, just for context, UI is closing its books for 2025. As we speak, today is the last day of close for everyone who is not the tax group. And then there's a separate thing for the tax group shortly after this. So preparing a full filing for PURA that could be, suitably reviewed and cleaned up and prepared for and made credible by January 15th, I think is not enough time. Because we definitely anticipated the concern of, things are moving back. That's less time to review. And I don't mean to put anyone on the spot, but it might be helpful if we could get some sense of like what elements of these earlier filings have been helpful and what discovery requests like really shed light on how you all feel about our filings. I know our known and measurable filing on January 15th contains one set of information, and even as recently as last year, we contemplated what I consider a material change in the known and measurable adjustments in terms of how we calculate the deferral balance starting point. But then we make the February 15th filing, which, while it includes a short piece of testimony and some information about the rates, if I just put myself in the shoes of PURA or the OCC, it'd be difficult, I think, for me to review that filing, then reach conclusions. So we were, the flip side of that is how much value are those filings really providing? And if there's any specific insight anyone could shed on that, that might help us in our future thinking.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful, Jacob, to explain because while I understand you would have less information earlier, the known and measurable filing is it's pretty light, I would say, because we're only providing what we think is going to have changed from 25 and the big things. So it's pretty light. And then the February 15th filing is just rate. Again, you're not getting any of the other exhibits or any other backup information. So pushing it back, January, I would agree with Jacob, that's just not probably feasible for UI. I can take back a February 15th and have a discussion about that. That would be 2 weeks prior. But I can tell you that anything earlier than a February 15th is not doable. I don't know that February 15th is doable, but given that we've already got a lot of information by then to create the rates, there's potential there, but we can't go any further than that.
And just one more thought occurred to me listening to my colleague share there. Just for context, UI's affiliate, the Central Maine Power Company, has a process that is different from the RAM, obviously, that is in Maine, not Connecticut, but it's conceptually similar. It's called the Annual Compliance Filing, or ACF. That's a filing that CMP makes on March 1st, typically for a rate change taking effect July 1st, just for what that's worth, just another data point out there. I know, Jay, you had asked the second question about there being only one rate change each year instead of two. We are happy to entertain that and talk that through further and explore whether that might make sense. I think that's beyond what we had contemplated for today. We were just fixating on procedural changes I'll call them at the edges instead of the more fundamental change. But I don't mean to say that we oppose that or that we accept that. That was beyond kind of what we had contemplated for today, but we're happy to talk that through further.
Thanks. And I see there's other people online. I just wanted to throw in, I guess I should start with a caveat saying, I think hopefully it's clear that whatever the commissioners generally are saying, and these, like, we're not pre-deciding anything, and my comments don't necessarily reflect the ultimate position of the authority, but I want to, I want all of us to kind of engage in the conversation with our own reactions. So I do have a reaction, Mr. Hurwitz, to your question about like the sort of the value of the earlier filings. That like has been a question for me historically, with the knowledge that as of January 15th, you don't have your full prior year done yet. So it's always been sort of, I've always been hesitant to like sort of put too much time into evaluating that filing, knowing, if the purpose of the filing is sort of the known and measurable adjustments into the next year, but we don't really have a fully baked prior year yet. It seems to me that like it's common, understandably, for there to be adjustments to those preliminary adjustment, like those preliminary estimates, as sort of full year prior data comes in. So I don't know. That's kind of part of why I kind of want to have this discussion, is issues is things like that have occurred to me in the past working on these cases of sort of like, if we're as of January 15th, like how serious and reliable is the information that we have at that point, Anyway, that's just my take since you asked for reactions. And I'm sorry, Mr. Sheldon, it's you're next on my list, but I saw Commissioner Cheeseman jump on, so she's.
And thank you, Commissioner. And just very quick, I'd like to echo what you said. I think particularly as a new commissioner coming into this, and hearing from people involved in the process, what is most useful? What is most helpful? What is the earliest stage at which that demonstrably useful information can be provided? And how can any unnecessary duplication be reduced? Because it's in everyone's interest, whether, you're with OCC or DEEP or Pure or, coming forward from Eversource or UI, to ensure that we make that this process works, but we accumulate the information in the most sensible and useful framework. So I think that's what I hope would come out of this, because it helps no one, much less the ratepayers, if we don't have a process that works in the most efficient way possible. And I know we're asking for the world, but we can ask for the world. That doesn't mean we'll get it, but thank you.
You can absolutely ask for the world, and we'll do our best to deliver. I'll just share two comments that are sort of tangentially responsive to you, Commissioner Cheeseman, and you, Commissioner Wheel. I think first, I totally hear the comment that making things later is more of a challenge, but I think actually for what seems to me to be the most reliable and material known and measurable adjustment each year, even March 1st is not too late, but rather too early. I think the known and measurable adjustment that has had the most financial effect and staying power across the recent years has been the projection of power prices into the future. And what I recall from period decisions from at least the last year, I think maybe last couple of years, there's been a push to use the most current information available. And by the time you get to either a phase 1 decision in April or a phase 2 decision in August, that January 15th forecast is looking pretty stale. So I recall us being asked to update that during the course of the record. And so that's an example where I think preparing something sooner is, I totally appreciate and get the need to review. I wouldn't want our calculations to take effect absent a thorough review, but I think how much value is there really in reviewing that forecast on January 15th? And the other comment I'd make is just imagine the hypothetical scenario where we as a collective group got the known and measurable adjustments really wrong. Let's say we projected the costs were going to increase by 10 million and the costs actually decreased by 10 million. Well, we're not absconding with that money from ratepayers. That will be automatically trued up in the normal course the next year. So I don't mean to diminish the importance of taking every effort possible to get the rates right. And you wouldn't want rate volatility year to year to the extent you can avoid it. You want to minimize rate shock, keep rates smooth. You want also rates to reflect the principle of cost causation, but there is that natural true-up mechanism of the RAM, particularly with respect to known unmeasurables. So that's not really directly responsive, I think, to what either you, Commissioner Cheeseman, or you, Commissioner Wheel, expressed, but those are a couple more thoughts for the discussion.
Thanks. And I'm going to call on Mr. Shellnuts, I promise, but I saw a note in the chat from Mr. Davis, I think. Yes, saying FYI, community organizations are also on the call and participating in RAM. So two things. First, the chat isn't part of the transcript for this this proceeding, so that's the reason I just read it out. Secondly, if Mr. Davis, if you're with Nonprofit Accountability Group, Pura granted the motion for intervener status there, so you're welcome to jump in and participate, raise your hand, and be part of the discussion too. And I should have said the same. Just for the record, CIEC also has intervener status. So even though we didn't, they weren't on the initial agenda, we didn't cover them on introductions. We welcome both of those interveners here also. And as Attorney Goodman has already done, you're welcome to kind of jump into the conversation. Anyway, Mr. Shellnuts, I'm so sorry. It's your turn. Please go ahead.
That's okay. I was just going to offer that I think Eversource is open to the concept of just having the single hearing in May or June, whenever the authority determined it was the appropriate timing for that. But also we're open to we're not trying to cut off anyone's process or what they need to get comfortable with the costs and the rates that are being proposed. So we're also fine with the two hearing approach, the phase 1 and the phase 2 as well. I just wanted to mention that there is some precedent for just the single hearing approach. I mean, prior to the changes made in 2001, that is largely how it was, how the proceedings went. These are rate trackers that do get reconciled, as Mr. Hurwitz indicated, so that if something goes wrong, if a cost is not, if the known and measurable isn't right, they do reconcile, and the money is either returned or refunded to customers through that reconciliation process. And so, as I was saying, there was some precedence for the single hearing. That is sort of the way it was done prior to 2020. It was over the course of two dockets. It was in the 2001-01 docket, and then the reconciliations would occur in the 2003-01 docket, as an example of the docket numbers. So I just wanted to mention that there is precedent for that if the authority wants to go that direction. And regarding the timing of the filing, I think moving it up would also be very difficult for us as well. As Mr. Hurwitz indicated, our books are not even closed at this point. However, if that is something that Pura wanted to explore, then maybe we need to have or should have a discussion about forecasts. Because what we could do is potentially forecast the last couple of months of the prior calendar year to allow for an earlier filing in the new year of various costs. But again, now you're introducing a forecast to that process, so it wouldn't be the actual calendar year costs. So that was all I wanted to offer.
Thank you. And Mr. Yanis, I'll call on you next. I did also want to add the agenda calls for like a general discussion session sort of after UI's presentation. I think we're kind of already doing that. So I did just want to pause, and I heard from the case coordinator, I think that Eversource didn't have a formal presentation. I just wanted to make sure that Eversource or any other stakeholder, if anyone has any statement or anything that they wanted to make sort of at the presentation part of the discussion, we could get to that before we move on to like continuing the discussion. I don't know, Mr. Shellnuts, does that make sense to you?
Yep. So I think we did have a couple of thoughts about the presentation. So I believe Eversource is largely aligned with the presentation that UI provided, with just a couple of minor changes or differences, I would say, and that one of those is that we believe that the standard interrogatories filing should not be filed the same day, that should continue on March 15th. That filing is the first set of interrogatories, and so they should be developed off the numbers that are filed on March 1st. So that would be the one slight difference that we would have is that we would want to continue the standard interrogatory filing on March 15th. The second is in the UI proposal, they propose, I believe, changing the GSC rates on May 1st. That for just the reconciliation piece only, as I understand their proposal, that would introduce a third rate change for the GSC over the course of a year. Currently, there's the standard change on January 1 and July 1, and so now you'd be introducing a third change on the GSC. So we would prefer that remains the way it is now, at least for Eversource. We do incorporate our true up changes at January 1st and July 1st. We do not, for the GSC, we do not change rates on May 1st. So that was a slight difference that we have from UI. And then just third, I mean, this is just really kind of procedurally. I think UI was proposing a interim decision by April 22nd, and I'm not sure if that decision is the decision on tariffs or if that is just the decision from the process. But I think the way as I understand the Eversource process is after we get a decision, we have to file any tariffs before those rates can go into effect, and then those tariffs have to be approved. So I think we would need that like a week earlier. So I think we would need, instead of April 22nd, I think we would need the decision April 15th. But again, that's just a procedural matter. So that was all I was going to offer.
And if I could just briefly, Doug Horton with Eversource, we do not have a presentation, and I'll just try to be very brief and just some general comments and remarks. But as Mike said, I think we're generally aligned with the UI philosophy, although some of the specifics, it's to be worked out. But more so, if we could just take a step back, our thoughts are that in first considering kind of what got us here, the prior process prior to 2020 did rely on forecasts and had rates changing on January 1st and then potentially on July 1st. And the only reason I say that is to say that it's important to keep into context. These are all reconciling factors. These are rates that are reflecting, programs that we administer by and large on behalf of the state of Connecticut, that we're just trying to get the costs right. So we used to change the rates twice a year based on forecasts. Then in 2020, there was a confluence of factors, kind of the perfect storm of things, where we had COVID hit. Our customers were then working more from home. We had a very hot July, and we had the introduction of new purchase power agreements that were coming into play at that same time. So there was a rate change on July 1st that really, when we look back, not that any rate change in rate increase in particular is a big deal, but when we look back, that rate increase wasn't outsized or large, but it did result customers were seeing high bills. And again, I think it was a combination of a rate increase, the higher usage from a hot summer, the change happening on July 1st, and customers at that point in time were using their electricity wildly different than they had because they were working from home due to COVID. So that caused this process to change, and we got to where we are. And I kind of think of it like if you have a medical ailment, you get a drug prescribed to you, and then that drug has side effects, so you have more and more drugs prescribed to solve those side effects. And I think that's why we've ended up with so many different filings. Point is, from our perspective, we are absolutely supportive of a streamlined process and also supportive of whatever process PURA and the stakeholders need to get comfortable with it. I think one thing that we do agree with and understand is moving that rate change from July to a shoulder month is helpful for customers, because that confusion of having a higher bill just due to usage, even if you don't have a rate change, that is something that for many customers is not as intuitive. Having a rate change, even if it's small, and then getting a higher bill, customers are inclined to associate that high bill with the rate change, even if that's not the main driver. And we've actually seen that since this change has occurred. So our general points are that while we agree with a lot of the points that have been made, and we certainly agree with some changes happening, I think it would be, in our perspective, beneficial to having more forecasts brought into the mix so that we're relying on the best available information. In some cases, that might mean using the last year's actual information to set the current year's rates, not just for the PPAs, but for anything that's in the RAM process. And also having the rate change on May 1st does make sense because of, like I said, that shoulder month rate change. I think you could still have all the process that you want and just having it extend beyond that May 1st change deadline. And then if in the event there is a required change that comes out of the further review and the further process, to Attorney Goodman's point, we could either incorporate that into a September rate filing, as is currently the process, or it could roll into the following year if it's immaterial, both for customers or to the companies. I think there's ways to get around that. But I do agree with the sentiment. I think Eversource as a whole, we do that right now. We're just sort of constantly sprinting from one filing to the next. And it would be, I think, much better if we could take some more time, understand what information is important. Right now, we produce thousands of pages that I don't think are very useful to people, but we're doing that as a result of a prior decision where we had a significant portion of cost disallowed. And so I think we are really interested in understanding what stakeholders find the most helpful and useful, and then when would be the right point in time that we could put together a comprehensive filing. From our perspective, it does feel piecemeal at the moment. And I think, speaking on behalf of the team, it feels like we're never kind of having the time to ensure that we're getting it right. So I do see little value in the cadence of filings right now, but totally understand that we don't want to shortcut the process in any way. And I think we could achieve that by consolidating the filings and just allowing for more process later in the process. And if there's a change required, then we figure out when and how to deal with that. Maybe it's a materiality threshold, just like what has been decided on the PPA cost adjustment. So that's what I got.
All right. Thank you very much. And Mr. Annis, finally, I think you were like second in line 15 minutes ago, and then I dropped you. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, sorry, and I'm gonna have to jump in a couple minutes for just a little bit. But I was thinking there are certain things, getting at what Doug was just saying, that cause a lot of volatility, which really isn't subject much to prudence review, and those are like the contracts and one large one in particular. And so I was contemplating if there's a way to kind of pull some of the MBFMCC or some of those things in a separate kind of category to allow more time on other stuff, because they tend to be more smaller changes and not causing the volatility, which causes a lot of upset, which, as Doug said, which is what triggered all of these changes. So things like the MBF, like the contracts, having those somehow treated differently, whether they are like subject to more frequent changes but less review, and allowing for more micro changes if we see deviations that are driving. Like I know this year it seems like we're going to have some deviation in there, even though we were fairly conservative going in. The prices have been higher this year than they were last year, and even higher than expected. So we're going to have, I guess, a fairly large overcollection. And so if we can keep track of that, if the utilities see that coming, either file with the authority, hey, we're seeing a deviation, we should move rates now and allow for that. That may allow less pressure on some of the other, where you're going to get more of the prudence review and need more discovery and need more review. So just maybe that's helpful. I'm not sure if that's streamlining or not. It could go both ways, but that's how I'm seeing. I'd like to discuss if we can pull that out and maybe treat it differently, and in particular allowing micro adjustments if we see large deviation on those contracts because they're so big. And with that, I do have to go, but Susie's on to help. So thank you for the afternoon. I'll be back in just a few minutes.
Thank you.
I was going to offer that. I think what Mr. Annis just described is sort of what I believe Puro was attempting to do in its final decision in 250103. We're going to be filing, I think, on February 13th, March 13th, April 13th, and May 13th, updates to the LMP pricing and how it's impacting PPAs. So I think maybe a step has been taken in that direction.
Thanks. So I think, I don't know if Mr. Annis, if your hand is back up again. I'm going to guess no, because he's off camera. So Mr. Davis, I see your hand up.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you for this opportunity to be here with you all, and thank you for the opportunity to voice some questions that I have. So you did mention correctly that I am representing NAG on this call, which means that my job is to take the information that I'm receiving today and to disperse that into a deliverable, digestible way for our members to also partake in the process. So my first thing is just maybe like a quick summary or just to make sure I'm understanding things correctly. To be quite frank, this is my first time dealing with RAM, so I do apologize if this is very novice level, and I hope not to be wasting anybody's time. So just so I can fully understand like what is exactly happening here and what I am participating in and witness is, so basically, there's this need and want to streamline the process, rightfully so. And the presentation that we just received from UI, their suggestion to do that is to um, move some of the filings back and increase rates before hearing, but also potentially removing close to 2 months of opportunity for discovery.
I might summarize, or I'm sorry, I just jumped in if
Yeah,
it's
no,
my
thank you.
opportunity to
Yeah.
do it. I might summarize it slightly differently. I
Okay.
think we're not trying to shortchange anyone's opportunity for review by any means. What we observed is that the calendar today has constant filings. There's a filing on
Uh-huh.
January 15th, on February 15th, on March 1st, on March 15th, and a hearing. And we're not proposing that any of those steps be eliminated.
Mm-hmm.
Rather, we're observing that there might be opportunity to make this process more efficient if certain of those steps were consolidated. And so
Got it.
we're not proposing to get rid of any of the things that exist today. We're just
Yep.
saying, observing that there's this staggered drips and drops, bits and pieces type approach, and we think it
Got it.
might be a little more efficient to do some of those things at once. And like I said at the beginning, we don't mean to die on this hill or try to hold anyone hostage. We were asked to put together a presentation with some thoughts on the process, and
Yeah.
that was our primary observation. Is there's
Okay.
a real staggered drips and drops approach to the
Yeah.
process today, and so we put
Right.
forward something that we think would be a little more administratively efficient, but we don't mean to shortchange anyone's opportunity for review. We take the feedback from Consumer Counsel Claire Coleman and everyone else, including yourself,
Yeah.
to heart.
No, thank you
And
for that. By no means was I trying to articulate that was the desire of UI was to eliminate anything. Again, I'm just trying to clarify what I'm hearing so I could take that information and pass it on to others to participate. So thank you for that clarification, Jacob. That actually is very helpful. So and then the analogy you use of the drips and drops is also something that I found useful for me because you're right, there are a lot of filings. So just a couple quick questions I maybe just want to throw out there. Don't need any answers now, but like around due process and like access and things of that nature. So I'm just wondering, like under this proposed like new RAM timeline or proposed timeline, as I mentioned, this will allow potentially a rate increase before a hearing, and potentially reduce discovery time potentially. So my question is really just, I guess, for peer to really think about how they intend to ensure that like low income rate payers who already face, barriers to participation have a meaningful opportunity to understand, review, and challenge these filings before the higher rates actually take effect, particularly when the data isn't available until after January 15th. So just want to kind of propose that and put that out there into the universe. And then the second part for me is really around accuracy, affordability, and kind of the risk question, which is, based on the information that I got today, utilities are proposing to rely on like the forecasting rather than complete verified prior year data. Potentially, again, all potentially, right? And so my question really to kind of, propose to peer in terms of their thought process and kind of thinking about this is, what kind of safeguards will we put into place to really prevent like lower income ratepayers from bearing the risk of inaccurate forecasts, especially given that like these households are at least able to absorb, over collections or mid-year rate corrections, if the forecasts are proven to be inaccurate or wrong.
Thank you for those. I actually have a question. I have a bunch of pre-prepared questions for the discussion period that I like, most of which we've already dipped into, but I have a question kind of getting directly to that, Mr. Davis. So maybe I'll skip to that after I see Mr. Horton's hand is raised. I'll get there once we like start the questions. I'll start with that one because I think I want to kind of have part of the conversation you just raised. But Mr.
I
Horton.
actually was not going to ask a question, Chairman. I was going to just comment on
Sure.
Davis's input, if that's okay. But it might be so. I think one thing I did want to support Jacob in the notion here is, again, if we take a step back, we did used to rely on forecasts for these rate changes. And I'll just note that in Massachusetts, we have similar rate adjustments and we incorporate forecasts into those adjustments. So that is not a novel concept. What happened in Connecticut in 2020 when we had that confluence of factors, it resulted in a change in the process. And I would say, this is just my, it pit that the forecasts was the problem. And so then we've been instructed to no longer use forecasts at all, except for these known and measurable changes. So now we've been boxed into a very tight time frame. And I think that's really all Jacob and the UI team is pointing out, and we agree. So we're boxed into now a very short window to have to produce information to adhere to a known and measurable standard, which Mr. Davis in the utility world is like a term of art that it's a kind of rigid standard we rely on. It's not a forecast. It's something that we can point to, and it's tangible. It's known and measurable. Whereas if we could now, if Pura was to reconsider that and to allow us to use forecasts, my opinion would be that we could, just as Mike Shelnitz pointed out, we could keep actually the same schedule we have today, hopefully with some condensed filings, and just have a filing come in January that is relying on forecasted information and really not change any of the other process. We could have a January 15th filing. I'm maybe getting way over my skis here because there was a holiday in there. So perhaps maybe January 15th isn't the right time to do it, but you could have a filing earlier in the year as long as there was acceptance of relying on estimated forecasted information. The problem is that right now, because of the change that happened where we used to rely on forecasts, the process change after 2020 said no more forecasts, only rely on actual information to set the rates. And the actual experience for customers has been in response to what was about a $5 a month typical bill increase in 2020. We have seen now multiple rate increases that are 10 times more than that under the new process. So I would argue that the reliance on actual information has been no better at predicting and stabilizing rates for any of our customers than the reliance on forecasts. While we know forecasts are going to be wrong, I think it would be better for our customers, for all customers, if we could further tweak and refine the process, because what we're doing is relying on actual historical information has not yielded, any smoother rate changes for customers. So I think if we could kind of loosen that standard and get back to relying on forecasts, then that would open up a lot of opportunity for us to be able to have more substantive filings earlier in the process, keeping the May 1st rate change, keeping all the discovery, certainly keeping the hearing. There's been a lot of pushback on the hearing. So I would say from Eversource's perspective, we can have 2 hearings, we can have 10 hearings. We don't care. We just want to get to the right outcome for sure. So in any event, I think that is to my point about like the more medicine helping it's because the whole impetus was to eliminate forecasts and to have a May 1st rate change. That just really boxed in the whole process to having filing after filing after filing. So.
Commissioner, if I may really quickly, I just want to thank Doug and Jacob for providing such articulate answers and helping me understand. Again, I'm new to the RAM, so I do want to make sure I'm doing due diligence for my clients and representing them and giving them direct information and correct information. So the answers that you all have given me today really allowed me to rebuild what I need to rebuild to introduce it to them, and so that way they understand just how you representing it to me. So I hope I didn't, deter things too far off, but I do greatly appreciate you both taking time to go a little bit more into detail. And to be quite frank, you might even receive an email from me just so I can get a little bit more information, if that's okay, or whoever I'm willing to email. I know there's ex parte and some things, and obviously you guys aren't PURA, but I just want to make sure I'm following all possible guidelines and rules. Thank you.
Welcome to the RAM, and it gets more fun every year.
I'm sure it does.
It really does. And I'll probably my legal staff will probably yell at me for saying this, but there is no ex parte prohibition between docket parties or interveners. So I don't want to speak for the companies, but from a legal perspective, feel free to email anyone who's other than Pura, like who's on this call. That's not, there's no legal issue with that. Commissioner Beecher, you're gonna cut in line. Go ahead.
Thanks. And I gave you a thumbs up. I gave you because I meant to raise my hand, but cheers to a good discussion. So yeah, I think there's a certain level of discomfort among some of us with the term forecast, So, because, you know, and I realize there's history here, and that was actually a really useful explanation. But I wonder if we need to say, you know, I mean, just get our language right around, you know, preliminary subject to review and reconciliation or something like that, you know, while still adhering to the known and measurable standard as well as the used and useful and the prudent standards, you know, strictly, as is our practice. So I just think maybe working around the lexicon, and then I wonder too about kind of going back a few comments. I think it was Mr. Annis, you know, about possibly categorizing expenditures and actually doing some empirical work on which ones tend to be more volatile, more controversial, more complicated, et cetera. In other words, so that we could sort of have baskets of issues and expenditures that could sort of help expedite the process in that sense, based on history, based on input, you know, from the technical folks. That might be helpful as well. But yeah, I think getting away, you know, the question is, yeah, whether are you, you know, known and measurable is a literal term, right? So so you can't really have sort of known and measurable. It's either known and measurable or it's modeled, and thus probably forecast, because if it's for a forward period. So yeah, let's just kind of keep brainstorming about that and how to maybe parse things up a little bit while providing, you know, some room, but maintaining the standards of review that need to be maintained. If that sounds okay.
Yes. Totally. Consumer Counsel Coleman, your hand's up. And you disappeared.
I hit my video instead of my unmute button, so I think it's gonna come back, and I think you can hear me, but there's a bit of a delay. I know you want to move the discussion on. I did just want to jump back to Mr. Hurwitz's question a little while back, in terms of, you know, what is the information that's most critical to get early on. You know, I certainly echo Mr. Davis's comments that allowing consumers to engage in the process is important. I think for purposes of sort of public understanding, the information that we're always really eager to get our hands on is what have the costs been for all of these programs in the prior year that we'll be reconciling. That helps us, you know, inform the public about program costs, and also consider in the substantive dockets where many of these programs are evaluated, you know, what changes might be appropriate. So that cost data is really important. And I know that you're closing out your books, you know, early January, but to the extent we could get that, and I think you've seen sort of a routine interrogatory from us come early, because that is the data that helps us provide the public with information. And then, of course, you know, I understand the known and measurable is an iterative process. And I appreciate and agree with Commissioner Beecher's comments about, you know, just making sure we're breaking down known and measurable and forecasts, making sure we have all of the information, you know, from our perspective, having both sets of information is the most comprehensive, but getting a sense of sort of what's coming ahead. And I do think that the RAM process decision that just came out does help us address you know, the specific concern with the PPAs, and if we're seeing volatility there and we need to address those quickly, and agree that there's room to kind of evaluate that for the broader set of NBF, MCC, and SBC charges that are trued up in the RAM process. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Hurwitz, I see your hand up.
Yeah, thank you. I had a couple comments that were designed when I wrote them down to respond directly to people, but a few people have touched on them now, so they're kind of just more general comments. But first, I think it was Commissioner Beecher who discussed forecasts most explicitly. I'll just say I know forecasts may have in the past been a four-letter word and to some degree still are. And to your point about different lexicon, I think it might also be helpful to differentiate between different types of forecasts. You could see forecasting, like what do we think our deferral balance for such and such rate mechanism will be 3 months from now. We could have a different degree of comfort with including a forecast or something like that. Maybe there's a separate set of considerations for, are you going to forecast LMPs? And maybe there it's, hey, we're forecasting, but really it's the best information that's available today based on futures prices. And futures prices are a prediction of what's going to happen in the future, but it's something you can directly observe and measure in the market. So maybe there's a different comfort level there as compared to something like we're going to try to predict the level of uncollectible expenses, just to pick a random issue. So maybe there's benefit, as you said, to evaluating the lexicon we use to describe forecasts, and maybe also there's different types of forecasts that we're more or less comfortable with. I think forecasts have worked their way into period decisions in larger and larger ways over the last few years. We've, I think, seen forecasts of LMPs. I think last year we began forecasting the deferral balance because Eversource had observed that if we were to continue the practice of using the December 31st balance, that was going to miss an effect that I think in their case was extremely material for us. It was a phenomenon as well that Pura adjusted in the final decision. But just to make the point that there could be different types of forecasts. My second comment was going to be that the process we're proposing isn't intended to be that different from the process today. I know I've made that point a couple times, but I'll just add a couple more thoughts for the group's consideration. First, to Consumer Counsel Coleman's point a moment ago, I know the discovery you're mentioning exactly, and no issue. I think we're going to answer the questions you've issued whenever the answers are due. I recall receiving them recently, but I think one observation I'd have there is those data requests aren't really directly tied to the filings that we've made. I think we got those data requests before we have even made any filing. And I say that not to object to the discovery, because I don't, but rather to highlight that if we were hypothetically to move the, say, January 15th known and measurable filing to March 1st, or the February 15th filing to March 1st, yeah, I think you could still issue those data requests as soon as you need them, and we could provide the best answer we can at whatever point is appropriate. So I think it makes all the sense in the world to me that the consumer advocate would know, that consumers would want to know, that Pura would want to know what the costs of our programs have been, use that information to inform your discussions with the public. I just want to highlight that I'm not sure that's the information that's provided in the earliest filings that we make. So just wanted to highlight that. And also that, like Doug, we will show up to however many hearings folks would like to have. I am excited to show up at the phase 1 hearing, whenever that is for UI in a few months. And yeah, happy to do whatever makes the folks comfortable. We were just putting forth a proposal. And then my last comment was just to clarify a couple of things from Eversource's summary of our presentation. I think we may have inadvertently left a comment in the GSC in our presentation. We did not mean to introduce more rate changes for the GSC. We were trying to propose something that is what I'll call light simplification, keep the process mostly the same, just a couple places of consolidation. We were not attempting to introduce more rate changes or make things more complicated in any way. And I'll also observe that we had included a date, I think, of April 22nd or April 23rd. That was just us looking up the dates of the phase 1 decision that we've received from Pura the last couple of years. That appears it's about the time of year that takes effect. We didn't mean to propose some other change by mentioning that date. We were just, for us, that's when the orders have come out. So became a little rambly, but thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead, Commissioner Beecher.
Thank you for that. And yeah, I mean, I appreciate the the discussion around forecasting. Of course, when we forecast in rate making, we have to think about everything, right? We have to think about everything that might be dynamic on the cost side and on the revenue side as well. If there's any elasticity effects and so on. So that's just a footnote to our conversations, and that's why we're cautious, I think, about it. But actually seeing Consumer Counsel Coleman on there, I actually had a question for her, if I may. And I was just wondering, Claire, about your reaction to the rationale to move the rate adjustments to the shoulder period from your perspective and consumer perspective.
Sure, thank you. I appreciate the question. I think we would agree and that the May and September, the usual May and September rate adjustment dates being on the shoulder months helps, and also have felt the pain with everybody else on this call when we in the one instance, moved the May adjustment to July to align with the supply reduction, in order to, with the hope of offsetting some of the increases, as Mr. Horton said, the weather ended up undermining that effort to offset increases, and everybody ended up with a really big bill. So I do think it makes sense to try to avoid that, and to enable customers to, experience rate changes at this, not, at a different time than they're not also experiencing a significant weather change.
All
And
right.
anyone, Albert or anyone from my team can add to that. Good.
All right. I think so. The agenda, I'm sure the agenda is a complete mess now, because we've got, I think we technically haven't moved on to the discussion phase according to the agenda, but we have what, like 38 minutes left until this is over. So I'm just gonna say we're already in the discussion somewhere in those topics that are listed on the agenda. And as I mentioned before, I had a list of questions I had put together myself to kind of lead the discussion. And the last one I was going to ask, I think, is kind of getting at something Mr. Davis raised. And this is actually like one of the questions I'm sort of most interested in everyone's opinions on. So I'll tee it up saying, like, when we're setting prospective reconciling rates, and I emphasize reconciling, what we're trying to do is, as we're trying to do when we set any kind of rate, we're trying to precisely as precisely as possible match future revenues with future costs. Like, we're trying to guess, we're trying to predict the future. We're trying to figure out how much is stuff going to cost, and if we can get that exactly right, then we match revenues to that, and then we hope, like sort of as a secondary component of volatility in this whole cycle, we hope that usage is as predicted and that the actual like rate design works. That kind of gets into the shoulder month weather issue, right? But anyway, zooming out sort of from the weediness, this is an exercise in guessing, right? Like, everyone at the table here is doing the best we can. I think everyone's, in the context of the RAM, united in we're all trying to do the best we can to make sure that the actual future allowable prudently incurred costs are are matching exactly to the revenue we set for them, right? So, but we can't, we don't have magic powers, so we're never going to be exactly right. I don't think it's probably ever happened. Like, I'm sure there's some statistician who could tell us the chances that we would be right, and it's I'm sure you could get struck by lightning while winning the lottery before getting a rate like exactly on the money, right? So we also kind of have to engage in this process with the knowledge and expectation that we're going to be wrong, right? Like, and we've sort of built in, not just we in Connecticut, but rate making has built in, protections, or at least, it's all kind of built into the soup of like, well, we're going to be wrong, and in the context of the RAM, the reconciliation is the fix for that. Meaning, when we're wrong, we look at it again retroactively. So we come back a year later and say, oops, how wrong were we one way or the other? Did we was revenue set too high or too low? And then we fix it. We set the future looking rate either higher or lower with carrying costs one way or the other. And I know most folks on this call are aware of this, but I'm saying this primarily for Mr. Davis and anyone else's who's listening's benefit. Ultimately, if a utility company over collects, over recovers, gets more money in a year than its costs, then rates are decreased in the next year, not just to kind of for the utilities to pay that money back, but also with interest. So customers are paid interest on that gap, and it works the other way too. So if a utility gets too little revenue to cover its costs, rates are increased the next year to catch them up plus interest. So we kind of that's how we correct the inaccuracy that is a certainty every year in the RAM. So I'm finally like meandering towards my question. I think I'll probably like talk for 10 more minutes before I get there. But with that knowledge that we're going to ultimately reconcile for inaccuracy one way or the other, we as regulators necessarily find ourselves making judgment calls like when we're thinking about setting rates now for how close to the bone we want to carve, right? Like, are we obviously, like I said before, the shared goal is accuracy, but there's risk one way or the other, like with respect to kind of how accurate you're trying to be, right? So if we end up setting revenues too high, the downside to that is that, and I think this is what Mr. Davis was getting at before, ratepayers now pay more than they should in real time, and that's not good, like objectively, right? Like where ratepayers are sort of overpaying for the costs that the company is incurring in real time. But as I got at before, there's a correction to that. They get paid that money back with interest. And then conversely, if we set rates too low, ratepayers pay less than they should in real time. And that's maybe in the short term beneficial to ratepayers, in the short term not beneficial to the company. Like it's the exact opposite scenario, right? Ratepayers pay less than they should in real time, but the downside from the ratepayer perspective, and this is a major component of the pain everyone felt in July of 2024, is then we have to pay back the shortage of what we being ratepayers of what they were, the underage of what they were paying, plus a significant amount of interest. Like the interest compounds with however kind of off we are. So I promised I was getting my question. I still haven't gotten there. What I'm really curious to hear, it's at least from my perspective, speaking for myself as a regulator who is like about to have to make these decisions, you know, should is it better to kind of like with the awareness of that sort of an awareness of the risks one way or the other of sort of where I land, for lack of a better term, where should we be leaning? Should we be leaning in favor of an over recovery or an under recovery? Like, is it better ultimately? This is what I want sort of everyone's opinion on. Is it better for if we're going to be wrong, is it better to be wrong in the direction that companies are getting overpaid now with the credit back to ratepayers later, or is it better for ratepayers to have the more immediate sort of accidental relief of paying less than they should now with the secondary sort of pain of having to pay that back with interest? So that's what I'd love to hear everyone's kind of take on. And starting with Commissioner Beecher, whose hand is raised.
I just want to add to your very good setup there, and that is it's a means. When you think about rates are going to be wrong in about 2 seconds, right? Because we don't have a crystal ball for any of this. So once the rates are set, then we see, yeah, like, as you just said, like how off were we? But these mechanisms are also a means of risk reduction. They reduce revenue risk. Some would say they shift that risk, which is also consistent with your question. They tend to shift that risk to ratepayers, right, from shareholders, ratepayers, and reduce regulatory lag. So, that's the function of these. So as we think about them, I think we have to think about that as well. And so that, I guess, sort of the corollary to what you're asking is the impact also on the company and its ability to achieve its authorized return, right? So it's really both of those. But yeah, I mean, I think you're asking the right question, like how, but it's really a fundamental characteristic of all of these sorts of mechanisms. They're meant to reduce lag. Therefore, they have, by doing so, they introduce a risk, a risk effect. And I like the way you posed it. And I would like to hear from people about, who should bear that risk of being wrong. If that's okay to add.
Mr. Davis, I thought at least you were first on the list of raised hands.
Thank you. I'm actually going to pass it to Camille. I'll go after Camille just because I've spoken a little bit and I want her to go and then I'll jump right after Camille. So Camille, if you want to jump in.
Thank you so much. I just want to say thank you for the opportunity. having this public discussion. I am a member of NAG, but I do want to state that I am speaking as a consumer. So while I have joined NAG and I am learning a lot of this process and appreciative of that, as a consumer, I'm a little confused about this conversation. So I understand that law states that Eversource or utilities should make profits and revenues. And on the same side, I understand that the CEO makes $20 million annually. And it's confusing as a ratepayer to see how Eversource is not making profits when the limit is as high as $20 million for one individual. So as a consumer, when you're talking about being overcharged for lost revenue plus interest, it's just like, it boggles my mind. I want to know, one, is when consumers are overcharged, do we get interest back? As well as Eversource, like they get interest back. In terms of your question, Chairman Wall, I believe an economist or hopefully OCC can help with that answer. There could be a simulation done to figure out what is the greater risk and what is the cost that it will bear on consumers. Yeah, so I just kind of want us to think about when we're doing everything, because we're servicing consumers. And I do feel since COVID, we like as a whole, the nation as a whole has lost its customer service friendly approach to everything. The timeline that's given with UI, while it's appreciated, it does as a consumer, does not give one enough time to fully grasp everything that is being stated, that is being said. And as a ratepayer, I think it's highly important that we should know what's being done and have enough time to digest it, and also input in the process. And lastly, I would just really want someone hopefully to explain, because I'm ignorant to this, why the revenue is so high that one person is making $20 million and everyone's complaining over pennies and cents, but yet you have this person making $20 million. It seems a bit excessive for a semi-public entity. Thank you.
Thank you. And I did see Mr. Horton's hand shoot up. I don't know if he intended to respond to any of those, and he doesn't have to, but I just put that out there. And Mr. Davis, I was about to pass it to Mr. Goodman, but I forgot. Mr. Davis, did you want to follow up with
Yes, really quickly. Thank you so much again for the opportunity, and thank you, Camille, for your words. So to answer your question, so you propose a question of like which one is worse, right? Is it on the front end or on the back end? So two things came to mind, and Camille kind of hit on one of them. The first thing that came to mind is like just the educational piece, right? Like I think it would be great if we can find a way to educate folks so that way they are aware of why their rates are fluctuating the way that they are, right? So if they know during this time of year there's going to be a rate increase because of these factors, they can either prepare for it, know what's coming, or start to budget knowing that potentially there could be a rate increase or decrease because they're educated about the process as a whole. So I'm just always big on education. If there's any way we can educate folks more about why these changes are happening, why they're seeing these rate differences, to me, that's just a win-win, right? But to kind of answer more of your question, for me, the question is, or the answer is, how do we create something that's less volatile, right? How do we create something that's not swinging one way pendulum hard and swinging back the other way hard? Because when we're talking about low income folks and folks that are constantly trying to figure out how to get through the day when it comes to bills and comes to economic barriers that are placed on them, these high fluctuations of potentially having to pay more and then also give interest and wondering if you're getting anything back. I mean, I'm sure there have been times where, the utility has to pay the consumers back, but do consumers even know they're getting paid back? Is there a way for them to be, warned or educated about the fact that they are benefiting in some way or some fashion? Again, just the educational piece. But the key point for me is the volatility. Like, is there a way we can lessen the volatility? And what does that look like, right? Because it's just sometimes there's way too much to cover for certain families that weren't expecting this tremendous increase, whether it's because we switched from forecasting to actual numbers or vice versa, we switched back from actual numbers to forecasting. Nobody knows that and nobody cares. At the end of the day, we know what they do. They half open their envelope, they peek inside to see the number. They don't pull the whole thing out and read anything, right? They just look for a number and say, okay, I owe $175. Can I afford it or can I not? That's it. And so if there's any way that we can meet folks where they are, but also while meeting them where they are, focus on the volatility of the issues that are affecting their quality of life, we need to do that.
Thanks, Vice Chairman Arconti.
Thanks, Chairman Wheel. Just like listening to Mr. Davis, I think he's kind of hitting the head on the mark in just terms of education with consumers in terms of volatility. So I don't know if it may be, I guess now I'm just speaking off the cuff, creating more ideas here. But and I would like to, if the utilities want to weigh in, by all means, feel free. It seems like most of the volatility is coming from power purchase agreements that are done outside of the market. And I think that definitely kind of gets lost on the average consumer out there. I know for most of us on the call, we're kind of well versed at this point in terms of states all across New England kind of doing these PPAs outside the market. But if Mr. Hur and Mr. Hurwitz even want to touch like 2 minutes, if they feel obliged, in terms of kind of when Connecticut kind of started seeing more volatility around these PPAs kind of going into effect. I don't want to prolong the technical meeting, but I think it could be helpful because again, those PPAs don't originate right from the authority. All the authority does is reconcile PPA costs with the companies. The PPAs are a result of legislative action, giving that authority to DEEP to run an RFP and enter into a power purchase agreement that ultimately just gets reconciled on our end. So I'll just kind of leave it there. If Mr. Horan and Mr. Hurst wanted to kind of include that in any of their remarks for the rest of the meeting. If not, don't feel like you have to, because I know it's not necessarily your guys' stuff to comment on. But I'll stop there. Thanks.
If I can interject, please. Again, Camille Thomas, regular consumer ratepayer. I asked 2 questions, and I'm on the line with, I don't know, maybe 40 professionals who are well-versed and skilled in this. And I just asked 2 questions and you guys ignored it. I think that was very rude. Can someone answer me?
Sure. So I can certainly try, Ms. Thomas. I think, so your questions, I know that you brought up the CEO compensation. I forgot the second question. I want to make sure if I'm responding.
I wanted to know that when consumers are overcharged, do they get the compensation back with interest?
Right. So the answer to that one's simple. The answer is yes. So the way, and just to take a step back, I think it is important, and Vice Chairman Arconti knows this about me. It's hard for me to answer anything in 2 minutes, so I really apologize, but I will try to address because there's been a lot said. I think a few things for this. If you look at your utility bill, and Mr. Davis, you said this, I completely agree. First, education, paramount. And we are fully on board and supportive of anything that we can do to engage with our customers, because it is very confusing to the average consumer. And I don't mean that to at all be disrespectful to an average consumer. Before I worked at Eversource, where I've been for the last 18 years, I had no idea about any of this. And I know it's a complex utility rates and rate making is complex, and so is a utility bill. There are four main things in your utility bill. There's the cost of the generation that is generated. That's about half of the bill. There's the cost of, as Vice Chairman Arconti was just pointing out, there are certain programs that are legislated for the utilities to administer, to pay for, and to collect the cost through our rates. So we have on our bill a public benefits charge that captures those costs, and we pass those through to our customers. That will vary, and I can touch hopefully briefly for all of us on why those are particularly volatile. Generally, that's 10 to 20% of the bill. And then there's two pieces of the bill that are the utilities infrastructure. There's the transmission charge, which is regulated by FERC, the federal agency. Those are for the high voltage wires that cross state lines. PURA does not regulate those costs other than to approve the rates. The actual costs are regulated by a different agency at the federal level. And then there's the local delivery. So that's the infrastructure that Eversource owns, operates. That's where, Ms. Thomas, you would see compensation of all of our employees, including the CEO. We get that question a lot on our CEO's compensation, and there is certainly no denying that CEOs are well compensated. Our CEO is compensated based on market analysis of what CEOs make. That is little, I think, comfort to your question and where you're heading. What I would say, though, is that headline number that you see is not in rates. It's in fact, first and foremost, all of our employees' compensation, because we are a shared service utility. This is speaking for Eversource. We support multiple utilities. Only the portion of our labor that is associated with each of our operating companies is reflected in rates. But for the CEO in particular, because that is such a high area of interest and scrutiny and concern, generally, regulators don't allow all or even a portion of the CEO's compensation and rates. So I understand the concern. It's a valid question. It certainly is one that we get often. The fact, though, is that the CEO's compensation is not by and large in rates. And so as much as it's a focus, it's really not what's driving at all to any extent a customer's bill, because it is simply not in the rates that are being charged. And like I said, the portion of the bill that is the infrastructure that Eversource does own and operate is less than half of the bill. This process that we're here today to talk about, not to say this to get out of answering any questions, but we're focusing on really the costs that are in that public benefits, for the most part, the public benefits portion of the bill. That's what we call the RAM. Those are annual reconciling adjustment mechanisms. That's the acronym for the RAM. And those are mostly costs that the utility is required to incur and then to collect for our customers and rates. And so that's where some of the discussion around, and I actually am not sure. It's such a great question, Chairman, on which is better to err on the side of an over recovery or on an under recovery. I'd be really interested in Consumer Counsel Coleman's perspective on that. From a customer perspective, I think at Eversource we always strive as best we can just to get it as right as we can. And so I think our posture is that we should be using forecasted information. I know that's a bad word, certainly in the context of setting our base rates. That local delivery, that's not something that we do. That's where we apply that known and measurable standard. But when we try to bring that known and measurable standard over here into the RAM, it becomes awkward, because I do think that for all of these components, it would be best if we could just try to get it as close as we can. And then just like, and I'm a broken record on this when we talk about the PPAs, I'll quickly touch on that in a moment and then I'll stop. But what is that we should be trying to get as close as we can to what we think the actual cost will be, and then to have a trap door in the event that we get it wrong one way or another. Because again, these are programs that, in my opinion, are not like a base rate, and then therefore should be subject to traditional lag for base rate items. These are programs that we're required to administer. They can be extremely volatile and variable, and that can have, and we've seen it have, significant financial strain on the companies because they have the rates have been set ultimately wrong to a large degree in the hundreds of millions of dollars, which is something that even Eversource, a company of our size, is something that's very difficult for us to float, or in the other way for customers to float. So we've seen there being extremely volatile rate changes with the introduction of these PPAs. To try to explain the PPAs briefly, as Vice Chairman Arconti asked, so these are contracts that the utilities are required to enter into that have us pay a fixed price for the output of two, in particular, there's many of them, but two large generating facilities. So we pay a fixed price based on the legislative mandate to do so, and we then collect that cost through our rates. But ultimately, what causes the volatility is when we pay that fixed price for the electricity that is generated, we then sell that into the market essentially at the same time. And market prices for electricity are not established by Pura or anybody. They are set by the market, meaning supply and demand, meaning that will change by the minute. And we really can't forecast that. Nobody can. If we could with accuracy, we would be doing something else for a living. It's very difficult to do. And so when you do that, what ends up happening is you pay a fixed price of $5 a megawatt, and then you sell it and you get whatever you get. And Eversource does not make any profit or markup on the difference between those two things, but we then put that difference into our rates. And that can be a customer benefit, meaning if we pay $5 for something and we're able to sell that same thing for $10, we've now made, we have a benefit of $5 that is then resulting in a lower rate to our customers. That benefit goes directly back to our customers. But if we have to pay $5 for something and we can only sell that same thing for $3, well, now there's a net cost of $2 as being the difference between 5 and 3. And so that $2 then becomes a cost that is built into rates as opposed to a benefit. And we don't have a good way, nobody does, of predicting whether it's going to ultimately be a net benefit or it will be a net cost. And we have seen that be extremely volatile. And that's caused there to be volatility both in that energy supply bucket, the generation that customers are paying as market prices are going up and down for electricity, that generation supply portion of your bill, roughly half of the bill, that will change and it will go up and down. And again, Eversource and UI, we make no money or profit on that. We just simply purchase the power and deliver it to our customers through the infrastructure that we do own and operate. And then there's a corresponding change that happens on these public benefits charges that moves sort of in the inverse direction of the electricity supply based on what I just tried to explain, and I'm sure I didn't do so well. So we've really seen volatility in that public benefits portion of the bill since these PPAs, the two large ones, came into place back in 2020. Again, that was the first time we saw the Millstone PPA be set into rates. That's what caused there to be, at the time, what was perceived to be a large increase in the public benefits rates. And I think relatively at that time, it was a large increase, but really what customers were feeling was a higher bill due to higher usage from being home for COVID, and then higher usage for having a very hot July that caused bills to increase. And then we've resulted in this change, which said the forecast was the problem, when really, even if we could have forecasted that rate perfectly, it would have only meant that the rate would have increased on January 1st of 2020 instead of on July 1st of 2020. It wouldn't have changed the ultimate outcome. It would have just simply shifted in time when that rate would have had to have changed. So that's, I hope a little bit of help in terms of what we're talking about here. Everyone's objective is to try to, as Chairman Wheel said, we're trying to get it right. And Pura changed the process after the customer reaction to that high bill summer in 2020 and said no longer use forecast to set any of these RAM reconciling rates, only use historical information as adjusted for known and measurable changes, which again, for a utility rate nerd like myself, that has a very particular meaning, which basically says, don't propose any changes, only use actual information from the prior year to set current year rates. But for something that is so volatile and variable, like energy prices that change by the minute, the prior year experience has not been a good indicator of what's going to happen in the current year. And that's resulted in some very large rate changes for customers. So a very long-winded response, and I see your hands raised, so perhaps not responsive, but I tried.
I don't know if I'm on. Am I?
I can hear you.
Oh, okay, perfect. Thank you. Thank you so much for your response. Um, it was very helpful. It has left me confused a little bit, slightly. Um, Eversource is a business. Let's call it a business, and it has customers that give money to the business, and then from that, the money is dispersed to the employers of the business. You stated that the CEO is not getting money from ratepayers. So where is the money coming from?
Yeah, so no, great question. So the all of our employees are paid through the revenues that we collect. When regulators set rates, they look at every line item, and this is for the local delivery portion. This is for what Pura does in what's called the rate case. The OCC, CIEC, all interveners, including NAG, if granted intervener status, review in great scrutiny every single charge that we seek to put into rates. And there are many charges that the regulator will determine aren't appropriate, or Eversource on our own will determine aren't appropriate to put into rates, which means that in addition to all of the line item expenses, our employees' labor, the cost of every material, of every pole, of every pipe and every wire, that we need to spend in order to own and operate the infrastructure that serves our customers. The regulator scrutinizes every single one and also determines what is the required rate of return that the utility needs to earn in order to be able to attract capital to invest in the system. Because, of course, we'd all love for rates to be low. Although I would be out of a job, I would love for rates to be zero. But ultimately, rates reflect the costs of the system and the costs of attracting capital, both from debt lenders, just like if you are fortunate enough to be able to purchase a home or a car, you need to most likely borrow money to do that. Companies are no different. We have to attract capital from both debt lenders and from equity investors in order to be able to get the capital that we need to pump back into the system in order to serve our customers. So when the regulator sets rates, they set rates to cover all of our costs, including the return on equity. So if the regulator decides that a cost like our CEO's compensation is not appropriate to include in utility rates, that means that we still have to pay our CEO, of course. If we don't have it in explicitly in rates from our customers, although the customer rate is our source of revenues to pay all of our costs, including the cost of financing capital, we have to find ways, other means of becoming more efficient, of saving costs elsewhere, or frankly, of earning less of a return than what the regulator has deemed necessary for us to be able to attract capital so that we can serve our customers. We simply won't be able to earn that level. And again, I probably am not being clear. We could take this offline. I know Mr. Davis had said he'd like to reach out. So if there's a process we could facilitate offline, I'd be happy to have a follow-up discussion. But the bottom line is that the regulator sets the level of revenues. The utility incurs costs that we need to incur to serve our customers safely and reliably. And the difference between our revenues and our expenses in any given year is the earned return that is available to pay back equity investors or shareholders for the use of their equity capital. So if the regulator sets rates for anything that we need to incur an expense for, our employees' salaries, for example, that we have to incur that expense, but it's not in our rates, then it can only come from a lower earned return as we have a fixed level of revenues and our expenses then are greater than what the regulator has allowed us to include in rates.
Mr. Horton, apologies for interjecting here, but a clarifying question, or hopefully potentially clarifying from Ms. Thomas's question. In your initial response, Ms. Thomas, I think I heard you say that Eversource is a shared services company. And so the operating company the customers of the operating company only pay a portion of the CEO's costs. If I heard that correctly, is it correct then to say that the CEO making $20 million is not the CEO, it's the CEO of a parent company? This is a very large corporate organization.
Yes, thank you,
CEO of, you can think of it as like a babushka doll or nested dolls, where the operating company that you're paying the bill for is, the lowest level in some regards of a much larger structure. And the CEO making $20 million is the, leader of that kind of larger parent company that has a lot of companies underneath it. And there's an allocation of that person's salary, among other expenses, to all those companies operating underneath it. So I think what Mr. Horton was saying is that, the extent that the $20 million CEO might be making is not fully reflected in the rates you see on your bill. It's only a slice of it. That's why, because the Eversource utility that is serving customers in Connecticut is only deemed responsible for some portion of that overall amount. Is that correct?
Much better. You said that much, and I'm sorry I missed the genesis of the questions. That is absolutely true. And then the other just sort of rate making nuance is that even with that being the case, there is still a process that PURA goes through in a rate case to evaluate should that portion of any employee's salary that is allocated to the operating company, should that be put into rates or not? There's a process that you go through to evaluate that. And the CEO in particular is generally adjusted, if not lowered, if not completely removed from the rate. But Jay's, thank you so much for saying that. And just to try to elaborate slightly, last 2 points. So the point is that Eversource, we have companies in New Hampshire and Massachusetts and in Connecticut. So the CEO is responsible for all of those companies and charges his or her time to all of those companies, such that when we set rates for CL&P in Connecticut, it only reflects the CL&P is Connecticut Light and Power, the former name of Eversource Connecticut Electric Operations, and it only reflects the portion that's charged to that company based on how much work is done for that company. I also just wanted to point out, and again, not to skirt the question, but that has nothing to do with the RAM process that we're talking about here. Just to point that out too, we're talking about by and large charges that, as Vice Chairman Arconti said, legislatively mandated for the utility to administer to collect costs from rates. Our CEO salary is in none of those.
Yes, I understand that. Thank you so much for all of these explanations. I read the RAM, the notice of proceedings, and I read last year's decision for the RAM docket. And I understand that my question has, I'm going to say, not directly anything to do with that. But I really appreciate you answering. Thank you.
Thanks. Consumer Counsel Coleman, your hand's up.
Sorry, mute malfunction. Sure, I just thought I'd try to take a stab at sort of integrating your question, Chair Wheel, with Ms. Thomas's questions about interest, because I think that interest factor, it is really important and does make the question of whether over or under recoveries, from a consumer perspective are better or worse. I think our mission is always to align, rates and costs as closely as possible because of the, discussion we've had around the harm of volatility and the swings either way. And I do think we've made some progress on that in the 24-1205 proceeding, and appreciate that these annual reviews are providing an opportunity to continue to achieve that dream of perfectly aligning rates and costs. But ultimately, as has been acknowledged, that's because prices are always fluctuating. That's nearly impossible. So then the question becomes, if the utilities are under recovering, that means on the one hand, consumers get to keep money, invest it. They've got, more cash flow, and there is a time value of money. So there is a benefit to an under recovery there, but then there's also a significant risk of having to pay that back with interest, which can, as we saw in the summer of 2024, be painful, particularly when it's a large amount. And then, on the other hand, it can also, it's always easier to absorb a rate decrease, which can happen if the companies have been over collecting and then are giving money back to consumers. So it is a very hard question. I think there are trade-offs, and that's why we have to continue on our mission to align rates and costs as closely as we can, and then hope to eliminate the swings in either direction.
Thank you. Attorney Goodman.
Thank you, Chair Wheel. I also was hoping to respond to your question, as well as a comment made by Commissioner Beecher. We agree that the reconciling rate mechanisms, can't talk, shift the risk of recovery to ratepayers. And in CIC's opinion, this is a reason why we have to be very selective as to what is included in the RAM rates for recovery. This really gets to a more substantive concern we have, that the RAM rates might include a number of expenses that are better suited for recovery through distribution rates. But I know that that's a substantive issue beyond the scope of discussion here. That said, Chair Wheel, to your question of, should the regulators err on the side of, which side should you err on given the inherent uncertainty that we face here? Frankly, I'm not smart enough to know how, as a general matter, you could err on one side or the other. But I think we agree with what Attorney Coleman said regarding, the mission really is to align rates and costs to the greatest extent practicable. And I think that, from that perspective, the focus really is on, if you're going to rely on a forecast, or even to the extent that you might rely on some historic analysis of cost to project forward, it's really about determining how do you set that up in the most reasonable way possible, with the most reasonable inputs and assumptions, and ensuring that if you are relying on a forecast, for example, that the inputs and assumptions are truly based on like a reasonable objective analysis of what should be reflected, as opposed to their putting the thumb on the scale to try to favor, come up with a number that more generally favors the utility versus customers. So, we think that in the long term, the balance really should be trying to, get those estimates as right as possible, because the methodology used to develop them is really, as reasonable or objective as they can be. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'll just really quickly maybe respond to sort of your question about like how we could lean one way or the other. I guess the basis of my question was sort of, if you just imagine a circumstance where there's there's an expectation of a significant cost change in the future, one way or the other, we as regulators are always going to find ourselves in the position of like, well, how much the greater we change current rates, the greater the risk is one way or the other, right? And so it kind of gets into this question of using forecasts or non-measurable adjustments or what methodology we use. But that was the basis of my question. It wasn't a suggestion that we are somehow going to like artificially press our thumb on that scale one way or the other, but it's always going to be a question of like, how far into the risk of change are we willing to step? And of course, like, maybe if you don't move at all, that's the riskiest move depending on what happens in the future. But anyway, that was the context. Like, that's sort of what I was asking, if that makes sense.
Thank you. If I could just jump back in to respond, I appreciate the clarification. Yeah, I think I missed that nuance. Maybe I'll blame it on the DayQuil. But from that perspective, I would say, I think it really depends on the particular situation. You understand that there may be circumstances where you see a potential change in costs coming down the pike, whichever direction it might go. I think it may come down to how certain are you that the change will occur. And it might be a case-by-case analysis to determine this seems, maybe in some circumstances you could look at and decide it seems fairly likely to happen. Maybe we should consider taking a step to try to moderate the future impact. Or, conversely, you could look at whatever that scenario is and decide there's a risk here, but it's still too uncertain to really warrant action now, as opposed to monitoring for potential future action.
Thank you. Also, just flagging, we got 26 minutes. Mr. Hurwitz, go ahead.
Thank you. I was teetering on the edge of whether to jump in with Mr. Horton a few minutes ago, but I'll just broadly say I think many, if not all, of the things that Mr. Horton described about how the RAM works and rate making works and the recovery of executive compensation apply to UI as well. I'm happy to elaborate further on that, but in the interest of time, I'll just leave it there for now. And then I've got three different ways of not answering the question that you've asked, Chairperson Wheel. I think the first one is, if I were in the shoes of a Pura commissioner, I think what I would be primarily concerned with in reviewing the RAM is getting the prudence review right. I know the question of forecast is crucially important. It impacts the bills that customers pay, but I think the check on those forecasts, good or bad, is the review of the prudence of the cost that the utilities actually incurred in the year before and making the process, procedure, timeline for that review as clear as possible, and then doing as thorough and good a job as we can in the interest of ratepayers. And so I think if I'm deciding where to prioritize my time or what interest to put first, and I'm in the shoes of a Pura commissioner, that's probably first and foremost on my mind, more so than a forecast, because like you said, our forecast is always going to be wrong. Even if we don't have one, not having one will be wrong because things in the future will change. And so in the face of that uncertainty, I'm probably fixating on the things that are more concrete, the things that actually happen, the things that I can review the prudence of. And my second comment is in the vein of what Mr. Horton expressed, and I think Mr. Goodman and some others echoed. I would not try to go too high or too low deliberately. I would rather, I think, focus on those items that are likely to be material drivers of the RAM rate. There's a lot of good discussion that I agreed with about the nuclear contracts the companies were required to sign and how those drive tens of millions or hundreds of millions of dollars of volatility. I would be, I think, a lot more concerned with making sure that our projection of those costs in the upcoming year reflected the best information available today, however good that information may be, than I would be about every single cat and dog, all of the little things that might be sprinkled throughout the RAM filing, because those forecasts will be trued up automatically. Even if we don't have a forecast and costs end up changing, there's an automatic true up. And so I think prioritize the things that are the most impactful to the rate overall, instead of worrying about. You have to worry about it all. Of course, I don't mean to suggest that there's any element of the RAM that you would ignore, but I would maybe devote my intellectual energies to the most material of the drivers. And then third and finally, and Mr. Goodman kind of expressed this in his most recent comment, but if I were staring down the barrel of a known and measurable change with less than 100% certainty, but more than 0% certainty, and I'm in Pura's shoes trying to decide whether or not that's worthy of reflection in the RAM. On the one hand, if you reflect it now, that may increase the likelihood. Cost recovery reflects when we incur the costs. On the flip side, maybe you kick the can down the road, cause customers to incur more carrying costs next year. I think I would be cognizant of other factors. The concurrent cost recovery, I think, is a principle of rate making. You want the utilities costs or rates to reflect its costs. You don't want to create intergenerational equity concerns. But that's not the only principle of rate making. You don't want rates to be too volatile. You want them to be predictable and all of those other factors. And so I think where rates are overall relative to where they've been, relative to maybe where you expect them to go, I think are some of the collections of factors that I'd be considering if I were in Pura's shoes, contemplating a less than certain forward-looking adjustment.
Thank you. Commissioner Cheeseman.
Thank you. And I want to thank everybody for their, as they say in the State Department, frank and meaningful exchange of views. And I just want to point out that as we, particularly looking at this RAM docket, as Vice Chair Conti and Mr. Horton pointed out, so much as that is driven by legislative decisions. And those are things over which we have very little control. So as we move forward, both for everyone on this call and for Mr. Davis and Ms. Thomas, there is no doubt that everyone involved in this process is making his or her best effort to come up with that unicorn, that perfect rate. But we can only operate and control the things which we can control, given our skill sets, given our remit, given the statutory requirements of this process. And a microscope, indeed an electron microscope, as I've discovered from my short time at Pura, is put into every single decision that's made here, whether it's the Office of Consumer Counsel, whether it's the Attorney General, the interveners. Everyone is looking at this to try and ensure the best outcome. And that will continue to be the case, whether changes are made to the RAM process, whether changes are made to anything else. And I want to assure everyone on this call that that is the commitment. Certainly, I won't speak for the rest of the commission, but certainly my commitment as we move forward. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for allowing that brief rant.
Thank you. We're all the commissioners are allowed to rant whenever we want. That's the awesomest part about being a commissioner. Consumer Counsel Coleman.
Sorry, my mute button does not like me today. Following the spirit of Commissioner Cheeseman's comments, which I really appreciate, and I appreciate this has been a really good discussion. Given your notice that we've got 20 minutes left, I did want to just briefly flag that we thought that questions number 2 and 3 in the agenda notice were really important, and we have the OCC has some specific recommendations regarding, timing and content of currently filed materials. For example, we've been urging for more details and transparency around administrative costs, around breaking down individual program costs, really seeking to have filings provide more specific costs as allocated to specific programs to help us understand cost drivers more. So look forward to future opportunities to discuss how those filings can better track and validate and support some of those expenses. And thank you again for the robust discussion.
Thank you. I was going to squeeze in like maybe one more, the second question of the discussion period. I was going to try to squeeze it in maybe after Mr. Annis. But Commissioner Cheeseman, I saw you just put your hand down. Go ahead, Mr. Annis.
Yeah, I want to get to this question because I also jumping in. I only heard part of the conversation, that's questions and responding. And I think my comment is, the being fairly conservative on highly volatile rates is a good idea. So if there's under collections draw significant more reaction from ratepayers than over collections. Unfortunately, people aren't really, really happy when they get money back, but they are very, very upset when rates go up. And I think the reaction of people is important for the authority to consider. So I do think the conservative aspect of setting rates on when you think things likely to require a cost increase should be probably a lower threshold than the other way. And so I'm not overly concerned with intergenerational concerns. If it's 6 months to a year, there's not a lot of turnover in that time period between ratepayers. If you're getting longer term, that's a concern, but I don't think that's a significant one. But I do. So I think DEEP has, when it comes to the RAM and MBFMCC, has pretty consistently said err on the side of conservative to this. And I think the responsive to the discussion was going before, as I jumped on, but that's DEEP, and I want to move on to the next question. So I'll let it stop there.
Thank you, Mr. Horton.
The only a brief reaction is, and this is, again, it's not helpful because it's just stating perhaps the obvious and doesn't leave us with an answer to the question, is just that for these programs, and again, really it's the PPAs are very volatile. There's a lot of other moving parts, perhaps sometimes more volatile than others, but the PPAs are the challenge, in my opinion, that is so difficult to get right. They can move very quickly and very materially in a matter of weeks. We've seen hundreds of millions of dollar swings, not an exaggeration. It's very difficult no matter how you get it. And even if you tried to err on the side of one way or the other, if you get it wrong, then the problem is just going to be exacerbated in the next rate making interval. And my only point I would say is, so with this year as an example, I may be misrecalling the history exactly, but we were seeing that the PPAs would be more in the money than they were in the prior year in this May 1st rate change, 2025's rate change. And so we had proposed to lower rates more than ultimately PURA did. Now we're sitting, good news, with an over recovery that will begin to flow back to customers this May. That's good. But the problem with the reconciling rate in particular, and this is again a rate making nerdy wonk thing, is that when you put a credit into rates or lower a rate, then even just getting back to normal is a increase to customers, even if it's not a large rate increase. And I see Chairman Will, you nodding, so you're following. But it's my point is simply, it's always good, of course, to be able to lower rates. I'd love to do that. The challenge and the problem, if we're trying to err as a policy, is there's no way for me to tell you that we're going to get that right. And even if we do have an over recovery, if we don't continue to have an over recovery next year, the absence of that credit going back to customers is going to cause an increase next year. So it's just, the point is, it's not always a good thing in that over recovery going back. Well, it's going to feel really good this May 1st. If nothing else changes next May 1st, customers are going to see an increase. So it's just something for us all to keep in mind. And it's just the reality of rate making.
Thank you. Yeah, that's what's what makes this stuff hard. That's the answer to this question I asked. Mr. Annis, do you have one?
I actually I just forgot to lower my hand, but I would say micro adjustments in response to Doug. More frequent helps avoid that issue. But that's where before I left, I ended. So I'm sorry, I meant to lower my hand.
Okay. I do want to, there is a public comment on the agenda that was supposed to be at noon. In case there are any members of the public who are waiting for that opportunity, I want to pause here and allow for that just before we close at 12:30 before I ask my next question. So if any members of the public who aren't parties or interveners want an opportunity to just make any comments, please feel free. Okay, I'm not hearing any, so I will move on to what is probably the last kind of discussion prompt in the next 14 minutes. And this is, I think, an easier one. And it's also kind of predicated on the assumption that we are going to be sticking with a two-hearing system like we have now. So like currently we have an initial hearing as part of phase one, sort of at the end of March, and then another hearing in phase two in July. The current for the current process, that initial hearing typically doesn't have a late file hearing afterwards, and also there are no briefs after that initial hearing. The kind of standard that was established in that 2020 docket was hearing number one, and then straight to the proposed final decision stage for that interim decision that happens in the middle of the year. And then the second hearing does have a late file hearing and briefs. And I guess I'll weigh in like with my own experience having worked on this stuff for OCC in the past. I'm just not sure that personally, like it didn't make a lot of sense to me because the like largest rate adjustment between the two is always that May rate adjustment that sort of happens subsequent to phase one. And also kind of as a practical matter, it's happened, I think, in the last 2 or 3 RAMs, like the authority has kind of run into this issue where there's a necessity for supplements or late files or whatever on the first hearing, and there sort of isn't anywhere to do it. I think like maybe what has happened in the past is that there had been supplements maybe that were like allowed to be addressed in the next hearing several months later. Anyway, I'm throwing out there just this general question of whether people have thoughts or proposals, if we did stick with a 2-hearing system in the 2 phases, if it would make sense to consider making any kind of procedural adjustments to those, to what sort of happens around those hearings. Mr. Horton.
I could just offer as a non-lawyer, and I don't know if this is perhaps getting ahead of myself, because I think based on the feedback in the comments, there's certainly concern over shortening and delaying any of the filings. So we've heard that. From the company's perspective, it's not possible for us to accelerate the filings. I think that is, perhaps on the margins, but not to January 15th, unless parties could get comfortable with the company's filing with actual information to a point and then estimated information for the rest of the point in period. In which case, I think, because my point to your direct question was simply going to be, it really does come down to a matter of time, in my opinion. I think it is all compressed to get in, just given that we are operating on sort of like certain immovable objects where we want to have a rate change on May 1st, and we want to only use actual information. So it just makes it very difficult to do those things and then still allow for sufficient process. So I'll just say that. But I think if we could accelerate certain things by lessening the reluctance to use forecasts at all, then that would open up a lot of doors for us. And so to have, perhaps as Mr. Annis has said, those micro adjustments for more things, maybe that's a way to get comfortable that we are relying on forecasts and forecasts are going to be wrong. So I'll just put that out there. I would say though, in the alternative, if that's not the case, I think one thing that perhaps the reason we don't have that more formal procedures on the first rate change is there is an acceptance. So again, going back in time, not that it matters per se, but it was a more perfunctory approval for these rate adjustments where the companies would file information, and generally speaking, there would not be a robust process that preceded the rate approval by PURA. And so that then resulted in, that's not good. We want to have more process. So that kind of got us to this point. But I still think there was recognition that like the first rate change is not the final rate change. And so therefore didn't need to have as much formal process with briefs and everything else that accompanied it. So I would just say that those are, in my opinion, kind of why we landed where we are. If we could change some of those immovable objects, that would allow us to have plenty of process and still, even add process before that May 1st rate change. But it really won't be possible, in my opinion, unless we can move off the reluctance to use any forecast at all. I think that will make it impossible to add anything additional.
Thank you. I just have a really quick, sort of unrelated follow-up, just about the forecast issue. Would it help Eversource if it got an indication from Pura, and this is just me talking, we haven't internally discussed this, just curious, if it got an indication from Pura that Eversource is free to file, to propose, like, to file whatever it wants, like if free to file forecast, free to file known and measurable adjustments, and with the standard being that like Pura would evaluate sort of whatever is filed and use our discretion to determine what makes the most sense. I mean, is the hang up that like there's this sense that the company's not allowed to file forecasted data?
Yeah, great. I love that. I think so. My first answer was yes, it would, except that we want to meet your expectations. These are public benefits charges by and large. We want to produce information that Pura and stakeholders find helpful, period. So we don't want to just shoot in the dark. I can remember in the first reconciliation that we went through that the known and measurable standard was introduced, being asked questions, well, why didn't you propose a change for X, Y, and Z, which to me was that X, Y, and Z were forecasts. And I can remember saying, okay, it would actually really help me to Commissioner Beecher's earlier comment, like this is perhaps a lexicon issue. I think known and measurable is a very specific thing. And if I get it wrong in a reconciling mechanism framework, I feel like I'm at risk of a disallowance. And I'm frankly, I'm going to be fairly candid here. I don't think I should be accepting a disallowance for public policy costs that are mandated on me to spend by the legislature. We should just be trying to collect the costs, period. We're not making any money on it. We don't want to. So we have been very reluctant to propose what's a known and measurable change. And I can remember saying, if you want us to propose forecasts, then I need you to tell me what you mean by a known and measurable change, because that means something very specific to me. So I guess in one way, the answer is yes, except that I wouldn't want it to just be Eversource, please do whatever you want, because then we could end up wasting everybody's time by us making judgment assessments on what you all want to see. Again, in my mind, I'm thinking based on the feedback, but I'm just one person. I am not the opinion that matters at all. It might make sense to move towards more of a, actuals through October, estimates through, and then that would allow whatever date, and then forecast for the current year. That might allow us to get a filing in December and have people have plenty of, but I don't want to just shoot in the dark. I would really like guidance from Pura on ultimately what you all want to see. We have morphed into this filing in the last 5 years based on orders that have come out and kind of changed over time as we've all, I think, tried to adopt, or adapt to these new measures. But so it's a yes and no.
Okay, thanks. I want to continue that. I think we're gonna have to have further discussions about that topic, I think, when we have more than 6 minutes and I interrupted my own. I'm the one who asked a completely different question about hearings. So Ms. Tebbetts, if you have a response to that question, please go ahead.
Is this me?
Sorry, Commissioner Beecher, I didn't see you. Yeah, you can.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah.
No, you can please cut the line. Go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. The sound cut out there for a second, but just to follow up quickly on Mr. Horton's point, though, there's still a distinction to be made between controllable and uncontrollable costs, and and prudence. Otherwise, we would have no prudence review if everything was uncontrollable. So that's what I think. I think we just still need to be cognizant. And that's why I think I'd like to see further analysis of cost components and their characteristics. Because there are even in the public benefits charge, and again, I'm still on the learning curve here too, but there may be controllables in there that we need to think about, and that we want to maintain appropriate incentives for efficiency in the management of those costs.
Thank you. Miss Tebbets, did you have a response to the much less interesting hearing question I asked?
Yeah, actually, I had a lot to say, but Mr. Horton said a lot of what I was already going to say, and we don't have a lot of time left. But we do echo the same sentiment that, you know, we're not opposed to more process. We are open to lots of ideas and lots of suggestions, and we do want to make this process easy for everybody, especially folks who are not familiar with it. We think these are good opportunities for us to take a look at those things and see where we end up. Thank you.
Thank you. And I saw Consumer Counsel Coleman with the hand raised, and now it looks like it's down. No hand raise or?
Thank you. I think I'm chewing on some of the last comments. I think there are, in terms of your specific questions on briefing, I agree that more process before bigger adjustments is always good. On the other hand, to Commissioner Beecher's point, if the idea is for phase one to be only uncontrollable costs and then, controllable, we always, as our office always has more to say on the the controllable, and really digging into the, some of the information that I referenced before that's important to us about administrative costs and operating costs, et cetera. So just need to think about how all this aligns to strike the right balance. Of course, we are a small team and can only write so many briefs. So I'm going to take a pass on what the exact right answer there is.
Okay, thank you. So we have 3 minutes left, so rather than risk kind of going over, I think I'm going to close it out. I do want to say we haven't really considered sort of next steps with respect to this conversation in these dockets, as reflected in the docket schedules here. I'm throwing this out there for Mr. Kramer. He's going to be mad that I'm just throwing this out impromptu. We might issue comment prompts to kind of follow up on some of these issues. But if not, I would invite everyone. I mean, I think all the commissioners agree this is something we're going to be thinking about throughout both of these dockets through the year. It's something we might consider and address in the final decisions that are going to be issued in the spring. So if people want to, I know everyone has so much free time on their hands and these RAM proceedings are so uncomplex. So in all that extra space you have, if you want to kind of consider making recommendations either in your briefs or however else in the docket, we'd certainly take a look at those in addition to actually evaluating the RAM filings. So any other commissioners have anything to add before we close out?
I just really appreciate the candid dialogue. I think it was very, very helpful and informative. So thank you.
Yep, I want to thank everyone as well. Great first day for me and lots of good things to think about.
Awesome. Well, thank you. I also want to thank everyone for participating in my wacky experiment here. Again, blame me if this felt like a waste of time. And we will see you all in March for your respective, well, we'll see the companies and presumably the interveners in March. That's when the first actual hearings for the RAM filings